Harmony Week the Interfaith Harmony Week flyer. Today was a warm day, but there are certainly colder days to come, and there are people who can use and are in need of some of that warmth. Also, please do keep your microphones on mute for the duration of our program. Our moderator will tell you how to raise questions of our speakers if you would like. Before we get into our program for this evening, it is my honor to call upon one of the chairs of the Calgary Interfaith Council, Reverend John Pentland, to share an opening prayer with us.
Okay, as we gather, I invite you, first of all, to take a good look at the screen and see the different names, if they're there, and or faces, people from around our city, and indeed colleagues who are here from the United States, from various religious traditions and spiritual practices. One of the things that is so necessary in these days of deep division and polarity is the sound and reasonable and faithful voice of harmony and understanding and compassion for those different than us, and celebrate that difference, as well as honor our own tradition in a faithful way. And so when you see the names and faces that we'll click on, know that we're not alone, that our religious tradition matters and we honor other traditions. And we also give thanks for the voices that we'll hear tonight, both from our speakers and from you, because the wisdom that we have is indeed within all of us when we pay attention and open ourselves to the soul that is each and every one of us. So I'm so delighted to have my spirits lifted, and I hope yours, when you know that you're not alone and you see the various names and faces join us this evening. This work matters. Let us pray. Spirit of God, in the beginning of time, your spirit moved over the waters and you brought forth life. You shaped the mountains and the waters and the creatures, including the human species. We give thanks for your curiosity and your love and delight in it all. And you said it was good, very good. Over our time, there have been twists and turns, and our shadow has appeared. And yet your light shines upon us to remind us we are beloved children of yours. We give thanks for the many different religious traditions, the names and faces that have spoken your prophecy of compassion and justice for all people. We give thanks for different religious traditions and practices, buildings and rituals that speak of your love and grace for all people, all plants, all animals, indeed all of creation. On this night of Harmony Week, we give thanks for the stories, for the conversation, the challenge, the question that deepens our understanding of ourselves and you. Be with us this evening as we continue and we close our ceremony, seeking wholeness and health, compassion and justice for all religious traditions, working together, that your grace and love be lived. Be in our meeting this evening. Be with us as we sleep and as we wake, that we may know your deep, deep love for all. In gratitude, we pray this night. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, John. We appreciate those wonderful words and wonderful way to begin our event this evening. I'm now delighted with great joy and excitement to introduce the person who will be moderating our discussion tonight. Dr. Harjot Singh is a dynamic and knowledgeable speaker whom I've had the joy of getting to know through my work with the Calgary Interfaith Council. She lectures to interfaith groups, and she's a distinguished representative of the Calgary Sikh community. Among her leadership roles in the Sikh community, Dr. Singh is the chair of the Sikh Advisory Committee of the University of Calgary Faith and Spirituality Center. She's on the board of directors of the Guru Amar Das Niwaz Midwest Senior Nursing Home Association. She's the past chair of the International Khalsa Council, and she was the inaugural Lil Fader Scholar in Residence at Beth Tzedek Synagogue here in Calgary. She's currently a board member of SICKNET and was a trustee on the Siri Singh Sahib Corporation. She's also been an integral part of Calgary Women in Spirituality and currently is on the board of the Calgary Interfaith Council. And it's great to have her on the board. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Cellular, Molecular, and Microbial Biology and a medical degree from the University of Calgary. She's been in private practice since 1992 as a family physician. Dr. Singh currently serves as the chair of the Alberta Health Services Spiritual Care Advisory Committee, and until this year, served as the chair for the Calgary Foothills Primary Care Network. She was awarded the Pluralism Award of Excellence from the University of Calgary in 2017, and I'm delighted, Dr. Singh, to turn our virtual microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. And I really appreciate that introduction and your kind words. I want to welcome you all to our last event and the closing ceremonies of the celebration of United Nations World Interfaith Harmony Week. And we're really blessed that the Calgary Interfaith Council has taken on this to celebrate the Interfaith Harmony Week. It's been a wonderful week of prayer, brotherhood and sisterhood, faith, sharing, dialogue, and education. And this evening is our last event, and it's a special event and a little bit different than what we've done thus far. We're going to have a discussion about the intersection of medicine and spirituality. And this is a really current topic or current issue as we pass through this global pandemic, to look at where do we go from here with hope, with healing, with wholeness, our theme for this year. The pandemic has not only affected every person, every family, every community and country around the world, but also the pandemic has created chaos in every aspect of life, even in our places of worship and spiritual practices. And interestingly, it's allowed us to the opportunity to examine the intersection of medicine and our own faith or religion. When I started medical school at the University of Calgary, the University of Calgary Medical School prided itself on the model of wholeness, looking at an individual from a bio-psychosocial perspective. And as a practicing baptized Sikh and as a family physician, I've always wanted to add the perspective of spirituality to healing and wholeness. So I view it as biological, psychological, sociological, and spiritual. Whether public speaking, teaching, or in my daily practice as a family physician, I'm aware of the need to include faith and religion where it's appropriate. In the not so distant past, medical science was considered to be mutually exclusive and at odds with faith and spirituality. To give you a picture, think of two circles, one in your right hand, the circle of faith, and one in your left, the circle of medical science. And they exist, but they don't meet. We look forward in time, and oddly enough, scientific studies of the placebo effect may have helped these two circles move closer together. Unknowingly taking a placebo by placing faith in its healing effect has shown to have a positive effect on health and healing. And in turn, this effect has created interest in what else could have had a positive impact, including prayer and spiritual community. Faith is a very powerful belief that can help and does empower healing. And so our circles of medicine and faith are no longer mutually exclusive, but they start to intersect. And so if we look at how healing occurs, studies are done on deep meditation and prayer, They show that meditation and recitation can induce a delta brainwave state in the brain. This is the state that you achieve when you have deep sound sleep. And this is where the body's neurochemistry releases many hormones, including the growth hormone, which allows the body and the tissues to heal. So in other words, deep meditation and prayer can bring healing. And so now we see these circles of faith and medical science overlapping even more. Nowadays, there's so many studies that acknowledge the spiritual component of healing. So much so that in hospitals, we have spiritual health providers. And in the Calgary zone and provincially, they administer spiritual care, faith-based care to those who have a particular religion or faith, and spiritual care to those who are not associated with a particular faith, and even to those who have an awakening or a need to understand illness while in hospital. In my opinion, as the chair of the Spiritual Care Advisory Committee for Alberta Health Services, it's prudent to acknowledge the spirituality of the patient in the wholeness of care, as it can aid in quicker healing, improved patient outcomes, and ultimately reduce the financial burden to the healthcare system. So this is the basis on which we're launching our discussion with our two speakers today. And so it is my privilege and honor to introduce these two accomplished speakers who will talk about the intersection between faith and spirituality from their unique vantage points. One from the spirituality of medicine, and one from the medicine of spirituality. And so it is my honor to introduce Dr. David Keegan, who is a professor of family medicine and also associate dean at the Faculty of Development and Performance with the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. Dr. Keegan is a community-based family doctor and a professor of family medicine at the University of Calgary. He works in clinic, long-term care, and palliative care, and also does house calls. He teaches family medicine and helps other family members develop their skills. He and his wife, Susan, have 3 teenage children and 2 dogs. He does have a backyard rink and enjoys outdoor activities. He is a member of the board of Hillhurst United Church, and he grew up and primarily trained in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and he's been living in Calgary since 2008. He is the founding editor of Learn FM, the open access Canadian curriculum in family medicine for medical students, an initiative recognized by the United Nations as a partner Sustainable Development Goals initiative. And so I'd like to welcome Dr. Keegan, and our second accomplished speaker who introduced me is Rabbi Mark Glickman. And Rabbi is the Temple of B'nai Tikva in Calgary, Alberta. He's also served the congregations in Louisiana, in Ohio, Washington State, and Colorado. He has been a religious columnist for the Seattle Times and the Tacoma News Tribune. And he has served on the faculties of Pacific Lutheran University and Seattle University, and is currently on the board of the Calgary Interfaith Council and the Calgary Conference of Christians and Jews. Rabbi Glickman was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and raised in suburban Chicago. He graduated cum laude from the Washington University in St. Louis in 1985. And he has received his rabbinical ordination from Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati in 1990. He has 2 books published, Sacred Treasures, the Cairo Geniza, I hope I got that right, that was published in 2011, and his second book, The Stolen Words, the Nazi Plunder of Jewish Books. He's currently working on his 3rd book, Looking to the Sun and the Moon, the story of the Jewish calendar. And so these are our two accomplished speakers who are going to speak about the intersection of medicine and faith from their unique vantage points. And so I'd like to remind the audience to please, if you can unmute, please don't unmute your mics. But if you have any questions, we will have a discussion with our speakers after they have finished speaking. So if you could write any questions you have in the chat, and we will try and then address those questions. So with that being said, the housekeeping being done, I'd like to invite Dr. David Keegan to speak to us from the spirituality of medicine.
Well, hello, everybody, and good evening. It's a delight and a thrill and an honor to be here, particularly under Dr. Harjot Singh's leadership. I look forward to how she's weaving together our stories and our thoughts and our questions for the end of your conference. Thanks so much for inviting me. Oh, and I want to check to make sure that you can see my screen. Let me just check. Can you see healing, wholeness, and hope? Great. Okay, I've just got to move something here. Okay, great. So I'm in Calgary, Mohkinstsis, and this is a place where the Bow and the Elbow River meet. This is a place where for millennia, people have been gathering together and sharing and learning stories and learning from each other. And so as we are here tonight, that's what we're doing. We're sharing. We've already heard some stories and ideas from Harjot and from Mark. We will, and I'll share some stuff, and we all will together. And so as we are here together tonight, I'm mindful that we are at this waypoint, which has been a place for millennia where people have done the same. These are the lands of the people of the Treaty 7 region, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. And Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And we are a treaty people, and we recognize that there have been atrocities that have been wrought upon the Indigenous people of our land. And as we move forward, we try to ensure that we seek truth and bring about reconciliation and honor the traditions of the Indigenous people who have been here for millennia. I was asked to speak about how we get past COVID with a view to connections and spirituality. And to be clear, there's still a lot that we are learning about COVID, although we've got some things figured out. And what we know is we can get past COVID, or at the least live with COVID in a way that protects life and recognizes that everyone matters. These are dark times. We're now in our 5th wave, with a 6th wave and its illness and death reasonably likely to occur in the near future. And we now have massive protests with even swastikas being displayed. So how do we get past this? Well, it's together with agreement that everyone's life and health are important, by connecting with each other, and by listening to science. About a decade ago, when I was visiting my hometown of St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, I saw this piece of fabric art. It was hanging on the wall. It's actually right now hanging on the wall over my shoulder. I remember walking up the stairs of the Craft Council gallery and seeing this on the wall. I was transfixed. It's not a joyful piece. You know, at first glance, it's kind of dark and stormy. More than half of it is taken up with dark sky, including a sun that is failing to illuminate the world around it. And yet, the longer I stood looking at it, the more I could see the purples, the blues, the reds, and most importantly, the burning bush standing at the edge of a water teeming with life, shedding its sparks out into the world. It spoke to me then, and still speaks to me now, of how even in the darkest times, there will be light, and the light of faith. As a physician, I care for patients who are often broken, whose spirits are crushed, and who hope for hope. And I've been there myself. A year before buying this art, I had severe meningitis and wondered if I would ever be able to think again. without having intolerable pain. I remember clearly laying on that stretcher and my doctor taking my hand and saying, "You're going to be okay. We're going to take care of you. This pain will go away." And I can still feel his hand holding mine. The power of that connection, it's still there. And in this COVID time, I had knee surgery which led to blood clots in my lungs, which robbed me of energy. I had a year of chest pain and difficulty breathing until some key parts of my condition were figured out and managed. It was an even darker time than my meningitis. And the care I received, though, as important as my oxygen therapy and medications I now take are, important were the times when my healthcare providers connected with me. Like the time when in hospital, the lung specialist searched for a chair so he could sit beside me instead of look down at me while I was in my hospital bed. And when an emergency nurse simply said, "This must be so difficult to know when to come for care and when to not come when your situation is so complex." Those moments of connection meant a lot and helped me heal with wholeness and hope. To me, spirituality is a type of connection. The connection of a person with a community, a sense of their place in the world, and maybe even a creed. I think about two main things when I contemplate spirituality from a medical perspective. The first is the spirituality of the patients I'm caring for. Over the years, I've learned that all of us will hit one or more key points in life when things are very low or have collapsed. All of us. I also learned, this is recognized in theology, thanks to John, described by Richard Rohr in his book, Falling Upwards, that we will all fall, and that it's important to fall upwards. As a doctor, when my patients are at those moments, whether it's a cancer journey, mental health condition, or something else, I seek to understand their spirituality and encourage them to explore it. For many, it has made a massive difference. The second thing is being aware of my own spirituality. I'm grateful for the tools and skills I have, and I'm grateful, so grateful, that I'm in a place to help others through such difficult times. I sometimes cure and always seek to heal. I believe we've been graced with the tools and understanding to help and heal people and our world. I believe science is a quiet voice of our Creator. So how do we heal with wholeness and hope and move past this pandemic? By humbly listening to that quiet voice, looking for the science on how to get past COVID, and by being kind to each other as we follow this science. The science now is clear on what we need to do. First, indoor air is easily contaminated with COVID, from which any of us can catch it. We must ventilate indoor air as much as we can and filter COVID out of the air with HEPA filtration units. Next, we need N95 masks for everyone to use when inside places other than our home. I recommend every place of worship require N95 masks for everyone in the building, and here's why. So good research has shown that if people are wearing cloth masks, both the person infected and people who are not infected are wearing cloth masks, Omicron can transmit in less than 10 minutes, even while wearing masks. Now, if both people are upgraded to surgical masks, it'll transmit in about 16 minutes. But if both people are wearing KN95 or N95 or similar higher quality masks, and even if they're not fit tested by professionals, if both the infected person and the non-infected person are wearing those higher quality masks, it takes about 25 hours for the non-infected person to get enough virus into them to trigger an infection. That's an incredible amount of preventative power. And so I would recommend strongly that you consider, getting N95 or KN95 masks for everybody in your places of worship. And the third thing is vaccination. Vaccines work, and they've alleviated suffering and death from so many different diseases over the years: measles, shingles, smallpox, polio. The COVID vaccines use decades-old vaccine technology, and with 3 doses provide outstanding protection against serious disease and death and reduce the risk of transmission. They're amongst, I just said this to somebody today, they're amongst the best vaccines we've ever had in terms of effectiveness. And it's just like incredible how well they work. So this is Alberta Health data taken today. So pulling data from today from the Alberta Health database, it looks back over the past 120 days for anybody over 5 years old, and it shows the rate of ending up in either the ICU or dying rate per 100,000. So purple is somebody with 0 or 1 doses. Blue is somebody with 2 doses. Green is somebody with 3 doses. So there's lots of discord we're hearing about vaccines, but vaccines work. And this is an incredible 30 different times increased risk of landing in the ICU if somebody is not vaccinated versus somebody who is fully vaccinated with 3 doses. And in terms of death, it's an almost 8 times greater risk of death if somebody is not vaccinated or only has 1 shot versus somebody with 3. And I'm not here to give a big scientific thing about COVID, but just to make sure that that's really clear. And so these 3 things can make a massive difference. So as I finish up, I think again about this tapestry. Yes, we are in dark times right now. And in darkness, we can see light. In darkness, we can be still and listen and be open to science and be open and kind to each other and make connections and connect through our spirituality. And we can heal with wholeness and hope. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, David, Dr. Keegan.
Oh, please call me
David. David, okay, thank you so much, David. And now I'd like to invite Rabbi Glickman to speak on the medicine of spirituality.
Thank you, Harjot, and thank you, David, for those important and thought-provoking words. So imagine this. You approach the gleaming, glittering temple on the hill. It seems like people from all over the land are going there, a massive stream of humanity. Upon entering, you're greeted by an aged acolyte who escorts you from the outermost chamber of the temple through a doorway and into another chamber behind it. There, another acolyte greets you and begins to prepare you for what is to come. He interrogates you to evaluate your readiness and performs some initial ablutions. He speaks in soothing tones, but doesn't succeed in calming your agitated soul. Soon the priest enters, garbed in white. He too tries to calm you, but behind his voice you detect a note of anxiety and agitation as well. He knows better than anyone what is to come. He, better than anyone, knows the stakes. The priest leaves as quickly as he entered, and after a few moments, 2 more acolytes enter the chamber. They're polite but direct. They escort you out of the chamber where you were and down a long hallway. Finally, you arrive at the innermost sanctuary. The doors open and you enter. The lights are surprisingly bright in there, the air crisp and cold. Everything sparkles, as pure can be. You lie on a platform. The priest looks into your eyes, speaking more calmly than before now. He assures you that everything will be all right. And then the ritual begins. The next thing you know, you're in the outer chamber again, and attending to you is an acolyte you've never seen before. You have little recollection of what just happened. All you know is that now things will be different than they ever were before. Now, what am I describing here? You might think that I'm describing some sort of an ancient medical or an ancient religious ritual. I just stole my own thunder, but because I'm actually describing what it's like for many of us when we go to the hospital for surgery. And indeed, I want to echo a theme that David talked on, spoke about. And Harjot said that I'll be speaking on the medicine of spirituality. What I want to emphasize here is actually the opposite: the spirituality of medicine. And I know we have some healthcare providers here, and many of us are, of course, are healthcare providers, even though we don't do it professionally as we care for loved ones. And I want to observe and share with you tonight the observation that that work is about the most spiritual work I can imagine. In that when people are suffering, when people are medically vulnerable, it is the impact of medicine and the people who bring medicine to the suffering is perhaps the most spiritual and religious thing that they can do. That's what I was touching on earlier in my description, because of course, the doctors who dress in white, or I know sometimes scrubs aren't white anymore, but they still have this air of purity and of cleanliness. And I'm told that actually when there's like a tray of surgical tools, there's almost in the medical world a preservation of the sterility of that tray that almost transcends scientific necessity. They're so careful to keep those trays clean, sterile. This is the language of purity. And what happens, of course, if you just sneeze if somebody sneezes on a tray of surgical equipment, then of course that equipment, those utensils, whatever it is, they are contaminated. This is the language of religious impurity. We in the religion business had that language long before you folks in the medicine business had it. And it's no surprise to me that we use the same kind of language, because again, the work of the healthcare professional is profoundly spiritual. I'd like to invite you to consider for a moment the work that members of the clergy do. There are lots of different words that we use to describe the work of members of the clergy, and they all have parallels in the medical world. Of course, in Catholicism and other religions, the leading or the most central member of the clergy is the priest. Historically, we in Judaism had priests too. In Hebrew, they're called Kohanim, and they haven't been. They lost the central part of their work after the temple in Jerusalem was last destroyed back in the year 70. But we had that in Judaism too. And what's the job of a priest? A priest is to be a conduit between the individual worshiper, the individual religious person, and God. And so when in Catholicism the priest provides the sacrament, there is a connection between that individual and the divine. And indeed, in Judaism, there's a Torah portion that we read. It's out of the book of Leviticus. It's called Mitzorah, and it is about what happens when you get a disease that's called tzara'at, which is usually translated as leprosy. Biblical scholars think it might have been closer to something like psoriasis or something like that. We're not sure. But what happens when you get a skin affliction in the Bible, a mysterious, inexplicable skin affliction? Well, the first thing you do is not to go to the doctor, because doctors hadn't been invented yet. Instead, you go to the priest, and the priest examines you. And if the priest proclaims this skin affliction of yours to be tzara'at, you are removed from the camp, you practice physical distancing, and the priest goes to check on you once a week to see whether the disease has cleared up. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people see, well, the priest is acting like a doctor there. I'm not so sure. I think that really what happens more precisely is that doctors today act like priests did back then. Because once the priest proclaimed your disease to have been cured, there's an elaborate ritual that involves the sacrifice of some birds, and the priest takes some blood and he puts it on the earlobe and the thumb and the foot of the person who had been suffering, and through this all they welcomed that individual back into the camp. Now, it sounds kind of gross today with all this bird blood all over you, but think about what that means. The priest puts his hand in the warm blood and then touches the person on their ear and holds their hand and touches their foot. It is the touch of the priest that makes the re-entrance back into the community okay and safe. The priest says, come back. And indeed, as Dr. Keegan said, when he was going through his hard time and he could feel the touch of the doctor's hand on him, it seems to me that doctor was doing something priestly there. That doctor was providing comfort, was reassuring, was providing a human touch. In that, in so doing, was allowing him, and doctors do this every day. I've seen it. I've experienced it myself too. Seeing these physicians, and when they walk in the room, somehow exemplify the presence of God and really bring, I would say, the presence of God into that room. One of the other significant clergy roles today is that which comes out of Protestantism, and that's the minister, the one who ministers to the needs of his or her flock. And doctors, of course, do that through the care that they show. I won't ever forget when my first wife and I were expecting my oldest child, that we would go to see these OBGYNs, and there were two doctors in this practice. And one of them, the women would go in and say things like, my feet really hurt. And he would say something like, well, what do you expect if you gain 60 pounds? Of course your feet are going to hurt. Which was probably not the best thing to say to a pregnant woman. And the other doctor, the woman would walk in, and before she said anything, he would reach out again with the touch. He'd hold her arm and he'd look deep into her eyes, and he had these beautiful baby blue eyes. And he would say, how are you? And I saw it in my wife at the time, and I saw it in all the other women. He was the talk of the town. They would melt. They loved it. And of course, both these doctors knew what they were talking about. They were both talented physicians, but one knew how to minister, how to care. I remember my current wife and I, we visited a friend of ours, a woman in her 40s who was suffering from terminal brain cancer. And we walked into the room together, and I immediately tried to slip into rabbi mode and to say all these profound things that would, make her say, wow, you're so smart, or something like that. And my wife turned to her before I could say anything, and she said, Lisa, can I put lotion on your hands? And I saw her hold this woman's hands and put lotion on her hands. And just that moment of touch, again, you'll pardon me for sounding so religious here, but I could have sworn that I could feel the presence of God right in the room as I saw the caring touch that my wife was able to share as she ministered to the needs of the of this woman. And of course, as I said, people in the healthcare world do this all the time. So when the nurse goes in and smiles at a patient, when the physician goes in and connects. The care that they show, in my line of work, I call that God's presence being manifest in the world. It doesn't get much holier than that. Now, in Judaism, of course, the most central religious, the most central role of the clergy is that of being a rabbi. And of course, the word rabbi means teacher. And in my work as a rabbi, I would like to see, at least on a good day, everything I do as teaching in some way, shape, or form, whether I do it didactically by giving talks or teaching courses or giving sermons or things like that, or whether I do it, I hope, by the example that I set. I certainly strive to do that all the time. And of course, doctors can do some of their best work when they share their knowledge and their expertise with us as they do all the time. We often say, well, should I eat this or should I eat that? Well, let's talk to the doctor, see what she says. Should I, is it safe after I've had a heart attack for me to go on a hike, or isn't it? I'm going to ask my doctor. The doctor becomes the sage. And indeed, we, by sharing their wisdom and their expertise, doctors provide us with invaluable guidance. In Judaism, there is a principle known as pikuach nefesh, the saving of a human life, which says, we in Judaism, we have lots of rules, lots of laws, 613 of them in our scripture. They've been subdivided into thousands more. In almost every single one of them, you're allowed to break if it is to save a human life. Even if it's potentially to save a human life. And that's why, if you are a physician, and you're an observant Jew, so you don't drive on the Sabbath, on Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, but you hear that there's a medical emergency several miles away, you get in the car, you drive over there as quickly as you can. If you are a patient and you need to get to the hospital, you break any rule almost in order to get there. There are a few you can't. Murder is one of them, a couple others as well. But for the most part, anything, the saving of a human life takes precedence over just about anything. And we learn from the physicians as to how to do that. We learn from their expertise, because the embrace of science saves, preserves, and exemplifies our valuing of human life. And what, my friends, is more spiritual? What is more religious than the affirmation of human life? And what better way can we do that than to listen to and to respond to the expertise that the medical world bring us? My friends, it is no surprise that physicians and nurses traditionally dress in white, because they are the priests and they are the ministers and they are the rabbis of our world today. As I prepare to close now, I would like to share something with you. We, as you all know, or as I assume you all know, there's this worldwide pandemic going on. In case you haven't heard, you should probably know that. Sadly, of course, this is not the first time this has happened. And there is a whole body of literature in Judaism, prayers and prayer books and reflections and meditations for Jews to recite at a time of pandemic. And I would like to share with you, before I close, the closing stanza of one of these prayers. It was written in the 9th or 10th century. It's called Al-Zot Te'aval Ha'aretz. For this the earth mourns, which is based on a passage in Jeremiah. It was the ending of a poem written by a man named Amitai ben Shefatia, who lived in Italy in the 9th and 10th centuries. This was recited particularly widely during another pandemic that happened a few centuries after this. But he ended his many stanzas long prayer with these words. He said, raise up a cure and a medicine. He's talking to God. Raise up a cure and a medicine for the nation that is sick, sad, and suffering. For to you it cries out and looks. And then he closes with the words from the first book of Chronicles, and let not your people be plagued. Isn't it interesting that this man in medieval Italy wrote words about a pandemic that invoked, that said, raise up a cure and a medicine? He was praying to God by asking for the things that doctors provide, and nurses, and medical technicians, and by extension, everybody in the healthcare world. Because you see, what these people do, what these holy men and women accomplish, is nothing short of sacred. Because when they save a human life, when they share their expertise, and when they reach out and touch people's lives, then a magical spark happens. It is the spark of God's presence glowing right here, right in our world today. And for that, I hope you will join me in being profoundly, profoundly grateful for the sacred work that they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Glickman. And I can very much, I think that when I spoke of the spirituality of medicine and the medicine of spirituality, our audience can see the automatic overlap that exists, even with the play of those two words. We do have a question in the chat, so I'd like to invite any in the audience if they'd like to ask a question. So I'm going to place this question or ask it, and then we'll have Dr. Keegan and Rabbi Glickman respond. One of the cruelties of COVID is that the guidance not to embrace, not to touch. No wonder there is so much despair and division. So what healing steps should a regular person take? So I'm going to turn that all over to Dr. Keegan first, and then we'll have Rabbi Glickman.
So back at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know how COVID was being spread. So then came social distancing, as it was called, and a lot of hand washing and surface washing and so on. We now know, for about a year now, we've known, and certainly the last 6 months is really clear, COVID is airborne. Doctors never like saying a disease is airborne because it means then you can have one person inside a poorly ventilated large room with 100 people infect people. And that's how we know COVID is airborne, because there are now multiple events of one person infecting a whole bunch of people in a poorly ventilated large room. And they were nowhere close to 6 feet near each other, because that's just so scary. But this is, now we know. So if people are wearing good masks, hug and hold and be together. It's the contaminated air that's the risk. And doing things outside dramatically lowers your risk. And so it should never have been called social distancing. It was physical distancing. Yes, the same 6 feet, but there, even that term, social distancing, sounded terrible and cold and pushing people away. But now we know, if you're indoors with somebody and you're both wearing good masks, you're fine. And if you're gonna have a coffee, great, maybe go outdoors and have the coffee, take the masks off, and you should be okay. I hope that helps answer that question.
Thank you, Dr. Keegan. And Rabbi, did you want to add anything to that question?
That's just to hear that, Harjot, is music to a rabbi's ears, of course. I will certainly leave Dave. I'm sorry about that. I haven't figured out how to turn that off yet. I will certainly leave the medical response to that to David. But what I will say is that there is an idea in Judaism, a notion in Judaism. One of the great religious obligations we have is called Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. We're not commanded to cure them. We were not commanded to feed them their medicine, although, if we can, of course we should, but we're commanded to visit them. And in Judaism, the idea is that a visit to somebody who is suffering can bring 1/60th of their healing. Now, does that mean that if 60 people parade into their room, then they're automatically cured? No, of course not, because the rabbi said, well, actually, it brings every person who goes brings 1/60th of the healing that the person has yet to do. But the fact is that by being with another individual, we can bring a modicum of healing. And one of the great cruelties of this pandemic, of course, it has been that for a lot of the time, it is the very thing that we need most of all. We need the presence of other people. It is that very thing during these shutdowns that has been that we've been cautioned against, and that's why it is so wonderful to hear David say that we can give his medical opinion that if we are adequately masked and taking all the proper precautions, then we're free to hug. I'm going to take David. I'm going to take you up on that because my answer to the question is that I've in my work I've seen this, and as a human being and as a rabbi I've seen that what we need more than anything now is one another. So the answer is what can an individual person do? And that is connect. As I said, it's one of the cruelties of this that the pandemic has made it harder to connect physically. One of the blessings, of course, is that this pandemic happened to these days and not even as recently as 10 years ago, when we wouldn't have had many of the technological tools that we have now in order to make some of these connections possible. So let's connect in any way we can. If you can do so physically, great. If not, phone calls, FaceTime, emails, texts, whatever it is, connection is key.
Thank you so much for that, Rabbi. And I really appreciate Dr. Keegan's comment about social distancing versus physical distancing, because it is the vibration of the words that we speak that carry weight. And so the social distancing took off, but it actually connotates something very different than physical distancing. So I think that's really important. I have a question for Dr. Keegan. Since you are affiliated with the University of Calgary, the Cummings School of Medicine, what steps are being taken for the medical students to understand faith-based healing, similar to what Rabbi was getting at, or acknowledging faith-based healing in medical school in their trainings?
So I'm not in charge of the curriculum, but I can say that the curriculum is largely anchored in helping our medical students learn how to be in the room with the patient and be willing to see any patient for whoever they are, whatever their issues are, and not being able to necessarily manage all those issues, because none of us can manage every single issue a patient has, but to be willing to see a patient, whoever they are, whatever their issue. And so part of that is trying to understand who's the patient in front of you and what are their beliefs. If they do have a particular faith, what does that mean? Are there restrictions? Are there constraints? I've had the pleasure of working with people from so many different faiths. I've yet to find any faith that actually restricts significantly in any substantial way my care of a patient for like a religious rule or something. It's been great to see, just like Rabbi Mark just shared a little while ago, that so many things can go by the wayside if we're focused on the health of somebody. But knowing those things, though, we can still, though, sometimes tune things to somebody's, preference or desire or their faith. In terms of the potential healing power, again, is part of, we do try to make sure that we are training people who know how to be able to say, well, this is a pretty rough thing. Who do you have to talk to about this? And, and one of those questions to help answer that question might be, are you part of a faith group? And if so, do you have, an imam you can talk to, or so on? And so I think it's re-strengthening. It was kind of all good. There's good research to say good physicians, good healthcare providers have always done this, going back decades and decades and maybe centuries. But certainly for the past 60 decades or more, there's been really good research to say that great clinicians have always been there in the room with the patient in front of them, trying to understand them and their context and bring it all together. And what's great now is we now know how to actually help everybody get good at that, hopefully.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Keegan. And Rabbi Glickman, did you have anything to add there or a further question?
I do have a question to ask David, but I just want to comment on one thing you said, that you haven't come across any religions that try to limit what you do. I mean, there are certainly some religions that do try to limit the work of physicians on the people who adhere to those religions. I'm thinking Christian Science as one example. And the other thing is that I'm noticing lately an idea that, I mean, we've seen some of the anti-vaccination and anti-medical perspectives on the right, particularly on the religious right lately. So I think that is an effort to limit the scope of medicine, no pun intended. But I'm also seeing this on the left now as well, that there is in the my kids hang out with a lot of hippy dippy people, and there is almost a religious embrace of the notion of bodily autonomy. I am going to heal myself. I'm going to let the food I eat heal me, and I'm not going to let anybody stick a needle into my arm and do this. So I'm also seeing that a little bit on the left, and that's not necessarily part of an established religion, and yet I think that perspective is very religious in nature. So I just share that comment. My question for David is this, and we talked about this when Dr. Singh and you and I were preparing. The major Jewish book of study is the Talmud, and the Talmud debates all kinds of questions. Some of them are sort of what if questions that are purely theoretical and may not ever have happened before. So one of the questions the rabbis in the Talmud debate is, what happens if a wedding procession and a funeral procession meet at an intersection? Who has right of way? Okay. Now, did that ever happen? We have no account of it ever happening, but of course that's not the point, because they were arguing something more fundamental, and that is whether celebration or grieving takes priority. Well, I've had a version of that that's come up in my work that I'd love for you to share your perspective on, and that is often when I'm at the hospital doing visits, I'll get to the door of a room as I do my rounds at the hospital, right when the doctor gets at the door of the room doing his or her rounds at the hospital. And so my question is, in that situation, who has right of way? Or maybe more subtly, what are some of the things that you think about in determining who has right of way? Because I'll tell you, in my work, I haven't ever had a doctor say to me, "Oh, we're here at the same room. Well, Rabbi, you must be a very busy person. You go first." Never ever has a physician said that. The physician always says, I'm very busy, Rabbi. I'll be done here soon. So I just would love to have you share your reflections on that with our esteemed group this evening.
Well, in my current work, I'm not running into that so much because I don't do emergency work or inpatient work nowadays.
It's a theoretical question. It's a theoretical question.
Yep, but for sure, like sometimes I'll reach out to somebody who, if somebody's connects me in a certain way to say their clergy or whoever. But back in the day when I was a rural family doctor, that would often happen, and actually, I kind of leaned in, and so that clergy member would be like part of our small little healthcare team, and there'd be times when maybe I'm having to. We've got somebody in a car accident and this child's mother might be there. And then we'd look at each other, arrive at the exact same second. And I'd say, can I see the kid right now? And you see the mom, and then we'll switch. And then the priest and rare times the rabbi would be like, sounds great. And so on. So we would actually weave our work together. There were times that the priest, this particular place where I worked was 98% Catholic or so. And so I got to know the priest really well, and they would refer me a patient. They would say, because they've been doing maybe spiritual care of somebody, but realized that this elderly person was maybe not quite able to provide the care for themselves that they maybe needed. And they'd refer patients to me. Sometimes they referred me patients who had depression, and vice versa. There were some times that I would refer patients to their priest or their minister if, because it would seem maybe there was something else that they needed help with that was beyond my ability. So I'm a big fan of weaving things together. And so that instead of one versus the other jockeying for position, we just go through that door together.
Well, I think that's fantastic, and that is so encouraging to hear. And obviously, if I walk into a room, if I get to a room as the doctor gets there and the person goes into cardiac arrest or something, I'm not going to say, let me go first, obviously. But I will add that as wonderful as your answer is to that question, I have not found it. I think we need a lot more people in the medical world who have that perspective. And I've often felt in the presence of physicians that they see what we in the religion business do, as icing on the cake rather than something that is essential to the well-being of the patient. So I love your answer to that question. I thank you, and I just will share with you my hope that becomes a more widespread perspective.
Mm-hmm. And I'd actually like to add in there, because right now I am on a committee, a working group with Alberta Health Services, where we are addressing spiritual care services and the level of essentialness that they are a part of the medical team. And so we're addressing as to how we can impact that essential nature of spiritual care within the medical team in inpatient care. So Rabbi, I think you're onto something, and we are looking at that too.
Fantastic.
Yes. I have a question. Work. Yeah, thank you. I have a question from Tony Snow, which maybe the two of you may not be able to answer, but I actually can answer for him. His question is, how about the practice of smudging or ceremony, prayers and songs in hospitals? And so as chair of the Spiritual Care Advisory Committee in Calgary for the acute care centers, we do have the ability at all the acute care sites to have smudging ceremonies. This is done through our spiritual care providers, where they are actually able to tell maintenance to turn off the water sprinklers to a particular room when the smudging ceremony is going to be happening. And so I would like to just encourage you all. There is a booklet that the Spiritual Care Advisory Committee has produced. It's on the AHS website, Healthcare and Spiritual Beliefs. And in that, we try to address the 13 largest religious populations in Alberta and deal with their issues and their spiritual care in acute care settings so that we could help the patient, we could help the family, and we could also help Alberta Health Services and acute care providers respect the spiritual needs and spiritual requirements of patients where it was appropriate. And so that is on the website for Alberta Health Services. David has, Dr. Keegan has his hand up.
Well, and as Tony Snow says, how do we build understanding? And the key part of the understanding is that we know the healthcare system in Canada has been often done terrible things to Indigenous people, forced sterilization and so many other things. And, healthcare providers affiliated with residential schools, and, only some people raised questions and concerns and so many didn't. And Joyce Echewan, and there's so many stories of Indigenous people coming to direct harm through the healthcare system. So basically anything that will help somebody who's Indigenous with that terrible history that's still living today, make things easier for them, we need to do. It's not really a choice, I don't think. I think that is how. And what's great to hear is what Dr. Singh has just described, that it's there. I didn't realize it was fully there in the way that you described, and that's great. I was just today in an academic hearing where there was smudging actively, and there was an elder there, and it was clear how important that was to a particular person involved in this particular academic event today. So anything that we can do, it's not really a choice, it's a duty.
Well, and I would just add, it's not only, that's an important message vis-a-vis our indigenous neighbors, but in a less historically fraught way, it is, it's also for other religions as well. Jews are supposed to light candles on Friday nights, and we are consistently told by people in the hospitals, you can't have a burning candle in the room, and so we have to use these lame-o toy electric candles, which are a sad replacement for the real thing. So hopefully there's room for all of us to work together from whatever our religious perspective.
Yes, thank you for those 2 points. I think, Dr. Keegan, you made a really important point for our Indigenous population. And so Tony also commented that he was just in Cochrane where they told us it wasn't allowed. And I know that this is for acute care sites, but definitely if you reference the Alberta Health Services healthcare and spiritual beliefs booklet, and then we can talk offline, but definitely there is a way that we can work on that and help to work on that. And that is, I'm just going to add on our Spiritual Care Advisory Committee. We sit with the spiritual health providers from all the acute care sites alongside a team of interfaith spiritual representatives from different faiths to address the issues of concern with regards to faith, whether it be last rites there to advocate for our patients' spiritual care, but not only our patients, because right now in the pandemic, we have our healthcare providers that are seeking spiritual care as well. So spiritual care is so paramount to the wholeness of the individual that we really need to promote it and be aware of it and access it when you are in the hospital or in any healthcare setting. So with that, I would like to thank our 2 speakers for their opinions and their experiences in terms of spiritual care and medicine, and the spirituality of medicine or the medicine of spirituality, because I think that overlap, what is a circle, that overlap, we don't know if it's spirituality that starts or medicine that starts, but they both coexist, and they do coexist in a beautiful circle. And so it behooves us all to look at that and go forward and move that forward as well. So thank you so much for your time and your participation here tonight. And I think that this talk brings together hope, healing, and wholeness for the end of this pandemic, that we all pray that we make it through and we come out of this pandemic richer, more dialogue, with more education, with more understanding. And so that is my prayer. And I am really grateful to the Calgary Interfaith Council for maintaining this United Nations World Interfaith Harmony Week and continuing. I believe it is our third year of doing this. And so hopefully with prayers, next year we'll be able to do it in person. I remember our board meeting where we discussed that we're hoping to have some events in person, and I bummed everybody out by saying, I don't think it's going to happen in person. And unfortunately, we're on Zoom. But it is my prayer personally that next year, next February, when we have this week, it will be in person. And so with this, I would like to call on our closing prayer. And I'd respectfully like to request Imam Hadi Hassan from the Hassani Association of Calgary to lead us in our closing prayer.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May Allah's peace, blessings, and mercy be upon all of you. Beautiful events. Thanks to all of you. I'd like to share a prayer from Islamic scriptures. The beauty of this prayer is it includes different parts of our body, as well as different bodies of our vibrant society. O our Lord, favor us to comply with your obedience and abstain from your disobedience, and have sincere intention and recognition of what is sacred, and dignify us with guidance and determination, and make us always speak uprightly with wisdom, and fill our hearts with knowledge and awareness, and keep our stomachs away from what is forbidden and dubious, and prevent our hands from oppression and stealing, and lower our gazes from wickedness and disloyalty, and block our ears from nonsense and backbitings and slanders, and let our scholars excel in piety and welfare of the society, and bless our learners with insatiable desire of knowledge and intent to serve the humanity. O our Lord, make those suffering from any illness be blessed with cure and comfort, and make the deceased be blessed with kindness and mercy, and the elderly with dignity and tranquility, and the youth with turning to God and repentance, and our women with dignity and modesty, and bless the rich among us with humbleness and charity, and those underprivileged with patience and contentment, and those striving for what is sacred and meaningful with success, and favor those imprisoned while innocent with freedom, and make our rulers rule with justice and compassion, and favor all of us to deal with each other with equality and good morals. O our Lord, make all the efforts of Calgary Interfaith Council, including United Nations Interfaith Harmony Week, blessed and a source of harmony, healing, wholeness, and hope for our city, country, and our world. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us all, and health, healing, and hope to all. Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
It was remarkable. Thank you so much.
night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, David.
Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom, for being our IT expert.
It's on the job training.
That's okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay,
Been a
have a good
wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.